these borders were drawn in an arbitrary and for many reasons, which I don't have to mention here, wrong reasons, we now have them and we grew up with them and we cherish them. And this conundrum is just extremely difficult. So I know you started talking about that and the different directions there. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate a bit more on that and what you see. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, it's a big question. I think, in some sense, maybe I'm a little bit too optimistic with these things. But I do think, on the language side, I think there's a sense that cross-border harmonization really helps. So there's a lot of history. If you look at West Africa Hausa, Nigerian Hausa and Hausa in Niger, partly because, of course, it's not a boundary, but it's also colonial influence. So it's English influence in Nigeria, French influence in Niger. For a long time, it's the same language, really. The teaching was different, the orthography was different, the pedagogy was different. And that also emphasized the difference between the speakers and the communities. So the inverse of that is, and people working on that, to harmonize that would at least give a sense of a cross-border linguistic community. And I think that's important. South Africa, I'm not quite sure, I haven't followed up the situation, but there were about, before the pandemic, there were really challenging incidents of ethnic animosity. So Zimbabweans being sent home, go back home. I think Thabo Mbeki intervened at some stage, said, look guys, when under apartheid, I was in Zambia for 20 years. And the Zambian says, you're welcome. You can't now say, you Zambians go home. We have to be a welcome nation. But I think the discourse, I think it really was about economic opportunities. I think it was money and status, but it was framed in a sort of language ethnicity sense. So I think our work can help to diffuse that. So I don't think realistically, I don't think we abolish borders, and I think my students think we should abolish borders. There shouldn't be any borders at all. The world should just be free. I find it slightly hard to imagine in practical terms. But I do think we can make borders more porous, and I think we make them less divisive. We can treat them as they are. It's a political division. There might be an economic one. You might have taxes from treating around. I think Kenya and Tanzania, you have very different land-owning systems. And I think part of the discussion with the East African community is that Tanzania is careful or concerned about how land is accessed and sold and bought in Tanzania and Kenya, which is very different. And you can see that's a legitimate concern, and you can work around that. But at the same time, you could say, the border in terms of maybe movement of people is less relevant. In some sense, of course, that it's the European Union experiment, which worked like that. So I come from, I'm German by background, so I come from that history, and I'm half British now, so I've left Europe. But I think it's those discourses which happen here, but I think they're also happening here in different ways. And in a sense, even more so, because I think the communities are almost, so the Yoruba community is very clearly aware that they are spread across different countries, or the Fulfulde speakers. I mean, in some sense, boundaries are sort of secondary. And I think to support that and find an implementation which allows people to work in that context, I think that's maybe the goal.
Thank you, Lud, for your fascinating lecture, which gathers and interprets so many aspects of the situation of African languages. But let me turn to the position of linguists in this context, because it's also something that is a challenge for the first 21st century. Linguists have much concern about their future, because the 20th century was very optimistic and very productive in terms of the solution of many aspects related to linguistics. But the 21st century seems to be different. Some linguists say that many questions have been solved, and artificial intelligence can replace linguists now. But let me refer to one important voice in this context. It was the discussion by Ray Jackendorf in 2015, maybe something like that. he formulated 5 challenges for linguists for the 21st century. I will not discuss them all, but I'll refer to 2 of them. One is promising, one is more or less controversial. Let me start with this controversial, at least for Africanists. He stated that linguistics does not need the description of new languages anymore. Because everything, what is discovered now is very, very small, because the typologic patterns are already recognized in all aspects. It is, of course, confirmed that it can be formulated. So this is something that is important for African scholars who were involved in the description of these languages. But another task, another challenge formulated by Ray Jackendorf was that now linguists have to turn to another goal. He formulated is like something like work for people's good. Of course, it may involve many aspects, and I think you mentioned most of them. So I will not refer, but really it is the great field for linguists, but at the same time it may separate linguists from themselves, divide them into sections. I think that this task of this work for people's good is close to the anthropology rather than linguistics. Do you confirm this problem of linguists, and whether really it will bring something in the future of linguistics? Oh, thank you, and sorry for this short, the long introduction.
Thank you for that. I wasn't aware of the Jackendorf, so I followed that up. I think I'm more positive, really. I agree with you. There's headwinds. I think not just linguistics. I think all arts and humanities disciplines at the moment, subjects at the moment, are facing problems in terms of funding. So in the UK, funding is being cut. I think across Europe, funding is being cut. I think we have similar experiences across the world. In part, I think there is a move more to the sciences, like the pandemic. People say we have to invest more in biological research. I think there is in our field more of a move towards development goals and to make that relevant. I'm critical about that. I think there is a case for investigating things out of curiosity. I think it's important to know what does language mean cognitively, even if nobody benefits from it other than humankind. We know more. But that's an argument which is not too easy to make maybe at the moment. But I think in practical terms, so my answer to that would be that we know actually very little about language. So a lot of our work has focused on a language. You describe a language. But if this, the translanguaging stuff is true and the multilingual stuff is true, then really that's the wrong question to ask, because every speaker of that language is embedded in a wider network of other languages. So I think there is a move now for the language documentation people to document linguistic ecologies. That's one term people use. So you look at a geographic area, say, or a community, and see what are the language practices in the community, which may involve one language, but may also involve several languages. And you would still need linguistic descriptions. So you would still need to know what is the verb phrase, what is the noun, how do you ask a question. But you would do that from a perspective of looking maybe more at also language contact effects, the choices of language use, repertoires in different contexts. So I think it's maybe more pragmatic, which I that personally think is interesting. But it also relies on more descriptive linguistics. And so, one other answer, if you look at the history of linguistics, essentially it goes from smaller to bigger. So we started with phonetics phonology because it's a smaller unit. There was a time when linguistics essentially was morphology. Bloomfield, 1940, says you can't study sentences because it's all very confusing. And then Chomsky said in 57, oh yes, you can, this is syntax. We have syntax, but Chomsky himself said, semantics, don't touch it, it's very confusing. And then Montague came around 10 years later and said, oh yes, you can study natural language semantics by using logic, but never, I mean, we can't do pragmatics, that's very confusing. But then Sperber and Wills and Levinson came and say, actually, yes, there is systematicity to pragmatics. And now Stephen Levinson says, actually, universalism is much more on the pragmatics level than on the phonetics level, so it turns it around. So I think it's a young discipline in linguistics. I think we also grow. I think the empirical questions we can ask are much bigger now because we are standing on 100, 200 years of research which have asked the smaller questions, if you like. So for me, the move to asking pragmatic questions is a very natural development coming from, phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, where now we can now ask pragmatic questions or maybe more anthropological linguistics questions. And we could not have asked these questions 50 years ago because the field wasn't quite ready for it, I think.
Trying to manage time. Regional balance down there, and then Michael, and then the last one back there. So we have three.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Martin.
Make them brief so that we can accommodate the three of you. We are already running short of time.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Mine is particularly to you, but also to colleagues in general. I have a mental glitch on the concept of Bantu languages, which you also alluded to. I think interesting when you look at the Ochi Herero numbers, which I could relate to from Southern Africa, and also when you alluded to isiZulu as one of the Bantu languages. So in the Isinguni languages, a human being is referred to as umuntu, mutu munu, the plural of which is Bantu. So meaning humans. So the idea of there is Bantu languages, I'm just trying to understand, are there languages that then are not Bantu, meaning are there languages that don't belong to human, if Bantu means humans? Thank you.
The mic goes behind.
Thank you. I mean, that's a really good question. It's a long discussion about terminology. So I think, so there's two questions. One is it the case that there's a group of languages which are similar and we want to academically identify them as a group? So Ochiherero, Kiswahili, isiZulu, if you look at the number 3, they all look similar. And that's the generalization. If you look at, what used to be, if you look at Kwe languages, Khoikhoi in Namibia, or if you look at Luo, the Luo, you won't find that similarity. So then the question becomes, do we want to identify this group of languages just as an academic exercise? And the question is then, how do we call them? And it is slightly odd to call a group of languages people. That's really quite weird, so I agree with you. So I think in South Africa there have been proposals maybe calling them Sintu, which would make more sense because C is the class 7 prefix, so it refers to languages, so the Sintu languages, which I'm perfectly happy with. I think there's a regular, which is called Bantu Conference, where people have these discussions. Maybe it just needs a resolution to say we change the terminology. I think people don't feel that strongly about it because it's weird, but it's not negative. I mean, lots of other language names often are very derogative. So like the old names for the Kwe languages, they are really negative. Essentially, they mean like poor people, bad people, lower people. So that's really quite offensive to the speakers. Whereas I think, my impressions from people speaking Bantu languages, they feel like it's weird, and there's the implication that other languages are not human, which clearly that's weird. But I think people think it's weird, but it's not offensive in the way that maybe other language names were, and where people really quite keen to say, no, this is no longer acceptable, and we use different terms. But it's an ongoing discussion, and actually a similar discussion about the prefixes. When I speak in English, do I say Kiswahili or Swahili? Because when I speak Swahili, I don't say German or Deutsch. Mimi ninaongea Kiswahili, tena ninaongea Deutsch, hiyo sio Kiswahili sana. I have to say, ninaongea Kijerumani, sio ndio. So then to say, when I speak English, to say isiZulu rather than Zulu, then people say, that's also weird. So it's an interesting discourse. So you can see, I'm happy to say isiZulu and Kiswahili. but I would not say Deutsch when I speak Kiswahili. So it's really subtle, and there's lots of discussions going on. But I think, as you say, it's for a wider group of scholars to come to an understanding. But it's certainly on the agenda. So thank you for that.
Brief one,
Yeah,
and then
so do I? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the nice presentation. I'm going back to where you say that 40% of the people in Africa, they don't run in a language that they understand well. My simple question is that likely to increase or likely to decrease in the future? Number two is, what is the future, or related to that is, what is the future of African languages? I ask this bearing in mind a few things, that all the information technology era, you know, all the programs that are coming with computers that now we widely use are in a language other than an African language, apart from maybe Swahili, which is not widely used by everybody in the continent. We are also seeing the Chinese coming in with a lot of funding for us, you know, to study Chinese. And so that brings the question of what motivation does one have to run an African language when at the end of the day, there's no utility, there's no value. So as a parent, I'd rather my child study Chinese because it has some utility at the end of it. We have, you know, started in English here. We use English to study, but you know, we go to study in the West. We have again to do an English test in the name of IELTS or TOEFL and so on. And none of them, even those funding we were talking about when green yesterday, nowhere does an African language, you know, appear. So in essence, there is no motivation for us to run the African language. Then also within the African continent, and I take Kenya, there are new languages that are emerging, or what you call language ecologies. There are new languages that are coming up, and they are tending to kind of, you know, make the old languages irrelevant. So within that context, and I could go on and on, but I leave it at that as an example of what drives me to ask the question on the future of African languages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a number of really important issues you raised there. The first one on the 40% of children not having access to education in a language they're familiar with, that is a global figure, not just Africa. So I don't know how it works out in Africa versus other parts of the world. And my hunch is that is going down, but that's just my impression from the stuff I discussed just now. It would be nice to check that figure, and I will do that actually. I see whether there's more recent studies or whether there's longitudinal studies to show that. I'm not sure when people really started to ask these questions. Now, the bigger questions about the future of African languages you raise, that's a really interesting issue, and we can spend a good another couple of hours, I think, talking about that. We can take it to the break, but I think people feel there is utility in African languages. So we had a very interesting talk about Yoruba a few days ago. And I can confirm that from my university, we teach Yoruba at Soas. And a lot of our students are Yoruba heritage learners. So these are children who are born in the UK, grown up in the UK, speak English, with parents who speak Yoruba, but they themselves don't speak Yoruba. And at some stage in their life, they think, actually, there is something I'm missing. In practical terms, when I go back to Nigeria, I can't talk to my community, can't talk to my grandparents. But also in terms of my own identity, if you like. It's important for me as a Yoruba heritage person to have access to the language. And then they come and learn Yoruba. So that's a real motivation we find across different languages, not just African. I also think it goes both ways. So yes, there's a lot of positive attitudes towards English, but it's also a question then whether we can build an environment where it's more profitable in practical terms to learn an African language. So I think in South Africa, I'm sure there must be policies in place where if it's at least if it's a public appointment, an African language helps you to get that post. Certainly in the UK, if you want to work in Wales, you have to speak Welsh. Or if you don't, you learn Welsh. And that it's policy measures where then people say, actually learning Welsh was dead, really. But now there's a very active Welsh learning community in schools and outside of schools, because people say, hey, it's valuable for me as a Welsh person, as part of the United Kingdom. We are one of the nations of the United Kingdom. But also there are real advantages because there's such a Welsh promotion policy in public supported policy across the country. So, and I would imagine if I wanted to work at the University of Nairobi, I would be hard-pressed not to speak Swahili. I'm sure I can do some lectures in English, but at some stage, that the committee meetings and the discourse around teaching will be in Swahili. So there is motivation which is there. What happens in 50 years' time, I don't know. I think there's a number of young Africans who only speak English, even though their parents speak other languages. There's different scenarios for that. And that's completely legitimate. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the Adichie Chimamanda argument. This is mine. This is African English, there's no problem. But I don't think that that's a trend which will really mean that there won't be other African languages other than English, if you like, in 100 years' time. But in a sense, we can't see into the future.
Thank you. Our online participant, can she be enabled?
Yes.
Go
yes.
ahead.
Hello. You said that between 40 and 90% of world languages are endangered. That's a huge difference between 40 and 90. So I wanted to ask you, because that's really, really interesting, where can I look for the information? Do you have any direction for me, please?
Thank you for that question. Yeah. These figures are a little bit plucked out of thin air because we don't have good measurements for that. But I can send you reference. So there's a famous book by Nettle and Romain, I think. That's one of the key from the 90s, I think. Our own colleague Peter Austin has worked quite a bit in that space as well. So just send me a little email. I can send you a reference. But the problem with evaluating that is, of course, that you have to ask yourself, what does count as endangered? So is it the number of speakers? So there's languages with very small numbers of speakers, but they are quite stable because young people learn them. There are other languages, huge numbers of speakers. So Yoruba is a classic example, 25 million speakers. It's really not endangered. But there are Yoruba discourses about the endangerment of Yoruba because Yoruba elders feel that the young people don't learn Yoruba either at all, or not in the way the old people think they ought to learn. And then it becomes a question of normativity. So I don't think Yoruba really is endangered in that sense. But it's not easy to do. And the other thing we find in documentation projects, often people talk about the last speaker. So that's really very small communities. So the last speaker of a language. And then sadly, this last speaker passes away. But then we found another last speaker. And that last speaker wasn't the last speaker because they felt they don't quite have the authority or maybe the competence to claim, I speak that language. At least they have less competence than that person who just passed away. Now this old person that passed away, they feel now it has come down to me to represent the community. So it's a very difficult field to assess. But the discourse around it, I can send you references. It's really, really interesting literature around that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael? Okay. Yes, Professor Kitaka Wambere. The mic is just around the corner.
Thank you very much. Let me start with some comments that somebody has made about people feeling that African languages don't have value. I think part of the problem is that we think of these languages in terms of the white-collar jobs. I mean, our minds are so much pegged on the white-collar jobs. So people say, well, if I learn Chinese, I could work with a Chinese company, but if I learn the Luo, there's no company that is asking people to speak the Luo. But let me say this. I was in another conference on Wednesday, and one of the things I told them, hypothetically, if we pass a decree today, say that nobody from this point should speak the Luo at all, I can tell you for a fact, and you can take this to the bank, the economy of Luo Nyanza will collapse within 3 days. You know why? Because as we talk here, there is so much wealth creation in Migori, in Kisumu, in Homa Bay, and in Siaya, and probably 80% of that wealth creation is taking place in the Luo. So the moment we begin seeing languages as tools of wealth creation, and therefore tools of development, then we will begin to see how valuable our languages are. You say no Kiswahili, no indigenous languages, Kikomba, the biggest market in Kenya, forget about Kikomba after 1 week. Now, the gentleman who spoke about Bantu, using the one Bantu, this reminds me of a conversation I had with my sister, somebody from South Africa, and she thought that maybe this is a category from Europe. You know, I mean, especially when we say, oh, Greenberg, 1962, to define, so that, you know, all these languages, when somebody talked about Emoen in Namibia, that's exactly the one for one in Kitaraka, where I come from. Number two, all these languages use the word Muntu. It doesn't matter whether in South Africa, in Kenya. So even if we forget about Greenberg, we can say Greenberg, go away and back to Europe, but we will still refer to these languages as Bantu because all of them use Bantu. I was extremely frightened when University of Pretoria, because of first of Ubuntu, invited me. I think I went to South Africa maybe twice or three times ago to want them to understand the etymology of the one Bantu. And I told them, you know how this one started about 7,000 years ago, some of them born of Niger and Nigeria, all these languages from Nyahururu in Kenya to KwaZulu-Natal, they use began as Babantu for people, and Ubuntu for humanity, and then Mumuntu for one human being. Thank you very much.
Okay. You have the last word. I have to finish this session now, because as I said, you go make it brief. It can be nice, but if it is not timed, it is timeless.
Thank you very much, Prof. That will be very brief. I just wanted to add my voice to the conversation, especially from the presenter who said earlier that our African languages may be lacking a future. Standing from where I am, as a media trainer, media scholar, I would like to say that our African languages, in fact, all languages matter. And for media, more and more radio stations, television stations, and other spaces are utilizing the vernacular languages. And therefore, even if your children speak that language, please go ahead, run for those languages, because they have a space and they will be accommodated in the job market, in the social consciousness, in the entire realm of growth for Africans. Thank you very much.
Okay, bring it here.
Hello, one. Okay, so yeah, I'll try and be very quick. So an issue that, or a theme that's been touched on several times, and Prof. Martin, which was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I think you've given material that everyone can take away and do great things with. An issue that you touched on, and was just touched on now, the exit matters. Right after George Floyd, the George Floyd incident happened, and this is definitely reinforcing the idea that our current linguistics practices are outdated. There was a talk or a meeting was televised, and there was a young African American girl who stood up, and it was very emotional. She was about 10, maybe 11, I think, and her comment was, "Why are we using the slogan Black Lives Matter? What we should be using in the 21st century is why are we resorting to discourses such as Black Lives Matter? Why haven't we moved on and gotten to the point where we don't need to say Black Lives Matter? Why is this an issue now?" And she received a standing ovation, and it was I think it went viral, quite viral. So this is the theme that's been touched on, and it just further reinforces the idea that our philosophy of language and our linguistics methodologies in linguistics are outdated. They're not processual. They're quite static, and process is what we should focus on, and not stasis. I think I have many more things to speak about, but there's no time. I think I'll quickly say one more thing, and then I'll sort of disappear. Yeah, I'll just say this quickly because this is the shortest thing I can say. The chat GPT and AI issue hasn't, in some ways, it's just taken us back to the Stone Age. Cambridge University, the Faculty of Linguistics, are now required to, because of this issue with students cheating and on their assignments with ChatGPT, they've been forced to go back to having exams and no assignments using pencil and paper, which is quite horrific, but this is their only solution to counter ChatGPT. It's really horrible. And, it costs a lot of money, a lot of resource, and just, it's very monolithic, but that's all they can do. So, but thank you for your talk. It was just incredible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't want to take too much time, but the ChatGPT stuff is really interesting because I think, if you look at the history of painting, there used to be paint in the Middle Ages, and they painted people, and that was very nice, and they looked alike. And then photography came, and people thought, that's the end of painting, right? Because all that market is gone. No, painting flourished massively because now it became an art form. People painted things which were not real because we had photography, didn't. So if you look at spreadsheets, if you look at how people used to learn mathematics, and you had a little piece of paper, I still did that, the sums and things. Nobody does that anymore. Now what you just have to learn to use either a calculator, or a bit smarter, use a spreadsheet. And that's it. Now for ChatGPT, I think what that means is that essentially, we don't in the education system, we don't judge students by the way they present their ideas. We judge them on the research design, on the empirical work they do, on the critical thinking, assuming that the presentation will be done by ChatGPT. You just take that out of the equations. Nowadays, I judge the students and say, oh, you wrote very nicely, introduction is nice, the conclusion is nice. That's not really interesting anymore. What is interesting is I can ask my students, go out to your community, and London is such a multilingual place, go to your community and observe 20 hours of conversation or 5 hours of conversation and listen to what people say and give an analysis of that. And then you use ChatGPT to present it. I'm fine, I'm not looking at the presentation, I take that as read. And if it's poorly presented, you really fail because it doesn't mean you can't write, it means you can't use ChatGPT. That's really bad. But then what you're looking for is critical engagement, ideas, empirical work. So there's lots of ways we can judge intellectual attainment, taking out this essay writing. And the party said that because essay writing is such an English thing. I mean, when I coming from the German system to the British system, this obsession with essays, I was struggling. Every day, essays, long. But of course, in England, you learn that from school. We in Germany, we also write once in a while, but it's more like, you think first and then, but in English, you just write. And I think, in a sense, ChatGPT helps because you don't have to do that anymore. But it's still a way to go, but it's an interesting challenge, I agree.
Thank you all for such an engaging keynote, and thank Martin. I think you have summed it all, and I think the engagement with the attendance shows that it has summed up most of our day presentations here. So let's thank Michael. Thank you, Martin. And with that, we have 2 sessions going up in 306 and down here. So let's just check up and go up in some presentations. Yes. Can I have that program? Maybe I need to read. Can I just pick it up, the program, so that I can read it up for...
I like your presentation.
So the session down here will be on language ideologies, and that's where we have Jumoke Adenyaju will be presenting on the Pan-Africanization of Swahili, a quest for reshaping of modern African identity politics. We also have Ruth Oji, Japa migration phenomenon. And then we have Kabinde on unreadiness of indigenous languages. Then we have the session up on applied social linguistics, and that will be on Sindile, who will be presenting on regional integration. And then we have Owadu Sunday on Izangoma Nganga Letuda, South African forms. So we have those 2 and others online. So we can go up and have others here as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think if we work efficiently, we can catch up. I think everybody at the conference doesn't actually mind the delay because the keynote was and the interaction was so fruitful, extremely fruitful. So, but we'll catch up anyway. All right, maybe have no lunch? No, I'm just joking. Maybe lunch is the most important part of the conference. In our experience, we know that, you know, people in conferences, in our conferences, they they're in the sessions and they're constantly looking at their clock, at their watches, smelling the food being cooked outside. So the buffet is certainly central to these events. And so it should be. Okay, so we'll give the speakers 1 or 2 minutes to prepare. So, okay, so as Professor Onyango Uma said, we have 3 papers being presented now. The first of which is now. The first paper will be by Jumoke Ade Yanju from Soas University of London, Soas at the University of London in the UK. And the title of the paper is The Pan-Africanization of Swahili, a quest to shape or reshape modern African identity politics.
Hi everyone, how you doing? So my name is Jumoke Adeonju, and as you can tell from my name, I'm Nigerian, Yoruba, to be precise. So I am not a Swahili native, and Swahili is like my 4th language. So 19 minutes. So Swahili is my 4th language, and the reason why I started learning Swahili back in 2011 in my undergrad is because my parents came as refugees to Germany. So I grew up in Germany, and there was obviously a lot of like repression when it comes to language at home, but also in school, and then the fear of multilingualism. So we didn't grow up with Yoruba, but Pidgin English. I had to teach myself Yoruba later in years. And Yoruba is a tonal language. So if you don't grow up with a tonal language like Vietnamese, Yoruba, yeah, then it's kind of hard to get the tones right. But yeah, so later on, I decided to take on Arabic and then Swahili. To just feel more African, to put it in a very essentialistic way. And yeah, so I'm starting off with a quote by the late Professor Beverly Coleman, African-American, who predicted in 1971, let it suffice to say that just as Black people are among the dynamic forces presently influencing the destiny of the world, so Swahili is. And yeah, this is from a paper where she analyzed the prominence of Swahili spreading in the African American society, also looking at the Black Panther movement and Black liberation movements, and where Swahili almost became like a symbol of Pan-Africanism and also Black unity. Like facing adversity. So I also want to start off with saying that this presentation and my work is more of a work of advocacy, and that's why I guess it's also labeled in language ideologies. So yeah, so I will also talk about the challenges, but more so trying to concentrate on the advantages of having a Pan-Africanized language or a common language as a force to unify African countries, but also beyond that, the diaspora, and also that coming from, I mean, the colonial history, but maybe also beyond the colonial history, because Africa is not ahistorical, which is something that we've been always taught till today, that kind of history starts with colonialism. So the quest of reshaping modern African identity also comes from like the quest to get back to self, and basically a linguistic decolonization in all our sectors. So yeah, Cabral also, Amilcar Cabral also speaks in his work about the impact of imperialism and how imperialism denies like our historical process and cultural personality or cultural identity. Growing up in Europe, I've always heard that Africa does not have any culture, which is crazy to say the least. But I think it's also something that is reflected in a lot of, I mean, we just had a discussion of, okay, which languages are more valuable in the world, like in terms of globalization and so on. So the case of Swahili, sorry, I need to like check here as well. Okay, time is running. So as I already mentioned, why Swahili is quite a powerful language to consider as a Pan-African language and a language of African unity is because it also gives way of like returning to African sources as a foundation for an African Renaissance, a rebirth of African Africanness or Africanity, and also practicality. Like in terms of practicality, it is the most widely spoken African language on the continent, and I think there is a question of whether it's able to compete globally. It is a language of unity and integration at sub-regional and continental level, and yeah, also a language of communication with the African diaspora. So just a quick historical background of Swahili. There's a lot of theories, but I picked up on this theory of the Bantu migration. The Proto-Bantu language was either spoken along the Niger River, which is today bordering Cameroon or Nigeria, or Central Africa. This is like millions of years ago. And we've also heard that Bantu, the suffix ntu is also found in a lot of African languages, in southern Eastern African languages that have Bantu, that are Bantu basically. You've probably heard of Ubuntu philosophy, I am because we are in South Africa. And then here are some examples of the suffix untu outside of Eastern Africa. You can see a relation in Wolof, nit, in Bamileke, mete, and also ancient pharaonic Egyptian, aramti. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but that's kind of like a way to maybe see some similarities outside of like the obvious of Bantu languages relations. So yeah, the realm of the Bantu language group is up to 300 million people, which is 1/3 of the African population. And outside of obviously having European and Arabic loanwords,
Swahili also has loanwords from other languages like bunge. Bunge is actually from the Haya language. Ikulu is actually from the Gogo and Nyamwezi group. I think there's a lot of like misconception about Swahili being a hybrid of Arabic and Swahili, which is just wrong. It's just loan words, and also European languages have loan words like coffee. Coffee is actually indigenous to African language, so maybe this is also a chance to see the globalization potential of an African language. It's just that people are not aware, and there's like this misconception that just continues. But yeah, so Swahili is truly African and a conglomerate of so many other languages outside of European languages and Arabic. And then there's also here Coleman in 1971. She also claims in her analysis that historian Doak found Bantu linguistic influenced Arabic languages as well back in the 10th century. So on the topic of the African roots of Swahili, I also did my own research looking at Swahili speakers who are researchers and also wrote in Swahili about their own viewpoint of the origin of the word Swahili, because I think that's where the misconception also mostly comes from that Swahili is like a hybrid language of Arabic and indigenous language, because Swahili mostly people know it as like a derivation of Sawahil or Sahil, which means coast. But then there's a debate of the origin of the word Swahili, saying that it comes from Wasiwahili. So Siwa means island. And I'm just going to read this quote. Ni kwamba Waarabu walipokuja wakawakuta wenyeji wa pwani au mwambao, waliwaita watu wa mwambao kwa Kiarabu Sahil na kubadilika mpaka kuwa Swahili. Maana ya pili ni kwamba walipokuja Waarabu wakawakuta wenyeji wakauliza, nyinyi ni watu wa kutoka wapi? Wenyeji wakajibu, sisi ni watu wa Siwahili. Katika lugha tuna masiwa na siwa, tuna wisiwa na kisiwa. Hapa ni kwa msomi wenyewe kuyalinganisha maneno au matamko haya mawili ni lipi lililokea. So this is a quote by Nabani, Ahmed Sheikh Nabani, in mapisi ya Kiswahili, where he basically says that there is this theory that when the Arabs arrived, they encountered the inhabitants of the coast, and they called them the people of the coast in Arabic Sahil, which later became Swahili. But then the second theory suggests that the Arabs came and actually asked the locals, where are you from? Where are you people from? And the locals responded, sisi ni watu wa Siwahili, meaning we are people of this island. And then you have Masiwa is this islands, and Siwa is singular for island. So this is a very important debate that needs to also happen, I think, in a more broad academic space. And then also Mbabu suggests that there is a linguistic affiliation to the Kingozi, which are the Pokomo people. All right, and now getting more to the political realm of Swahili, the Swahilization in the 1960s by Mwalimu Nyerere, who was the first president of Tanzania. And Swahili coming from a minority group of speakers, actually, becoming this expanded national language and symbol for nation building, and also just being used in all sectors in Tanzania today, in media, in schools, in the public, the roads, the signs, the road signs, and so on. So the Maji Maji Rebellion in 1906 to 1907 against Germany. That's where there was like the first encounters of using Swahili as a symbol for anti-colonial resistance, Swahili as a language of the people. And during the colonization era, Germany actually adopted Swahili as a language of administration, but also based on this racist belief that the German language should stay pure and not be spoken by black people. Which is kind of also in Tanzania's advantage, especially for Nyerere, to implement Swahili as the language of the nation. And then in the 60s, his well-known Ujamaa policy, African socialism, in the Arusha Declaration, where he set Swahili as a denominator for the common identity, to help with self-reliance and nation building. And now Tanzania has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, but students still struggle to compete globally because there's been a debate about Tanzanian students who were basically Swahilized, like the whole nation are now not so good in English, and so they have this like fear of competing globally, and I think that's something that one can touch on in the next slide about the globalized language of power, which is English and certain colonial languages, French. But I think English is like the dominant language of power in the world. The colonial languages are still very much present in Africa. I'll show you a map later. Adeshina says that the pursuit of political independence was undertaken to the splendid neglect of the epistemic. So the presence of colonial languages as official languages in most of African countries has kind of taken away the potential of developing African languages as languages of power, and is this post-colonial or colonial continuity. There are countries like Ethiopia and Somaliland who only have indigenous languages as official languages. So recently, Ethiopia adopted 4 more in 2020, Afan, Oromo, Afar, Somali, and Tigrinya. And yes, so there's this, I think there's also this misconception of Africans being oral people, which is just a very bold generalization. And so there's extensive modern printed literature and ancient literature and history and so on. But for some reason, that's not being taught in schools and documented. Okay, I don't know if you can see this well, but this is like the map of colonial languages in Africa. Even in Somalia, the Italian has a status as well. And this is a quite old school racist categorization of languages of Africa. It's really, really, really European model. Which also takes away the linguistic diversity of Africa. It looks more so on maybe like the historical. You can maybe see from the Niger, Congo, Kordofan, the Bantu migration sort of, but like this subgroups of language families are needs to be revised by African scholars and African language speakers. Which brings me to the point of linguistic injustice based on this colonial histories. Linguistic linguistic injustices that persist on the continent, and also which leads to being to languages, indigenous languages, also being extinct and endangered. I don't know. Oh, what? 2 minutes? Oh my God. Okay. So I'm just gonna skip. These are points made from the Asmara Declaration in 2000. So the human rights of the linguistic human right for African languages, which you can always look up. So it's not that people haven't been discussing this. This has already, there are valuable points made, but they haven't been implemented. Okay. So I think it's really important to go back to this Asmara Declaration of 2000, and also finding ways of implementing these very valuable points made. Kanana, a scholar, she says that as soon as these languages are empowered horizontally as languages of communication among masses and as languages of education, they can easily become languages of vertical integration. So now this is also a question of harmonizing an African language, in this case Swahili, with cultural identity, within a continent that has the most diverse languages of the world. Because that would mean to harmonize the language into the educational system, to the technology, science, and also trade. Okay. Wow, 17 seconds. I don't even know how to. So the language, Swahili as a African language for African unity has been also advocated by Kwame Nkrumah. Oh my God. Yeah, I think I'll just skip to like the last bit, and then. Okay, so one of the ways to implement Swahili as a Pan-African language has been analyzed by Mboop, who says that we need to institutionalize Swahili, and we need to establish African cultural centers. We need to educate and retrain educators. Also, adjusting the curriculum, and he was suggesting to adjust the curriculum in a way that Swahili will be compulsory for all students, for all African children as well, and then also enhance the Swahili being used in governance, so meaning political diplomacy, and he even suggested that African politicians, head of states, should actually all learn Swahili, maybe even just a beginner's level. And before you're able to even how do you say? Before you're able to be set up for election in any political instance, you need to know at least one African language. I would even go further. You need to actually be able to write political statements in an African language, because that's also what Nyerere did. He wrote the Arusha Declaration in Swahili, the Ujamaa policy in Swahili. So I think that's something that should be a given, to make Swahili actually, to turn it into a language of power within our continent, and then also foster this intra-African trade, even up to tourism. But yeah, so this is like the economic advantage of Swahili. So one of the points in Nyerere's Ujamaa policy was kujitegemea, which means self-reliance, to depend on yourself. But then depending on yourselves also bring challenges with it. The challenge of implementing a unified language. The Ghanaian Swahili speaker and scholar Jahene Kwashe, she actually questions the ability of Swahili to be the language of power, basically, because there will be complexities of harmonizing national and regional identities, as I mentioned before. And then Swahili also has its own differences in terms of like regional differences in pronunciation, intonation, and so on. And yeah, let me just see if I can. And then also a very huge point is how to fund this implementation, because obviously you would need to train multiple instances and develop schools and also new curriculum, but more so to develop job opportunities, and I think also as a motivation and incentive for people to learn Swahili, as we also mentioned before, because globally, and then also inflation and the things happening today. But yeah, so I'm gonna end on a question. Thank you all for listening, and sorry for going with the time. Yeah, so this is a quote by Adesina, who says, "A discourse of impossibility, especially political with a capital P, disempowers." So the question raising is, can Swahili actually counterbalance post-colonial structures? And I know you're supposed to ask questions to me, but I feel like this is such a delicate topic, because also one of the challenges is that, or the risk could be that indigenous languages will be sidelined, or the research and funding actually to preserve indigenous languages in the name of Pan-Africanizing one language, may just be overshadowed. So yeah, I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have time for one question, but if we really sort of move efficiently, we can have a few more questions at the end if we can fit them in. Yeah, we only really have time for one question, but we'll try and move efficiently and fit a few more in at the end.
Thank you very much. My name is Simeon Sungi. I'm from Tanzania, and I feel empowered. Your presentation made me feel so empowered. It reminded me of the 1968 James Brown song, you know, "I'm Black and I'm Proud." So you've made a couple of references to Tanzania and the founding father of my nation, who has made a huge contribution socially, economically, to empower Black people. Now, I think one of the struggles is, and I think you mentioned, the aspect of identity and language is one of them, and Tanzanians struggle to create policy whereby Kiswahili would be taught from primary school to university. There was an attempt. But then there was also a lot of power struggle. The question was now, this graduate who has been trained in Kiswahili from primary school to university, where will they go? Where would they find jobs? Where would they work? And therefore, there's this reverting back to the English, the colonial master's language, which I am speaking now, unfortunately. So I see that struggle. So in your view, what steps should be taken to, one, make ourselves empowered through culture and language as Africans, as Black people, and on the other hand, this global economy that dictates that we have to, use certain languages. Certain languages are considered, prominent languages. So how should we do this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm thinking that this is also like a bold reform suggestion to say politicians should all learn Swahili. But outside of African politicians, also Europeans are already learning Swahili. I think there's a really a big wave in Germany and even in China, and maybe to also implement that in that foreign policy structure, that certain discussions will only be made in Swahili, for example. And I think also, like, if you implement Swahili as a language of power in these political institutions and instances, it's already been adopted at the AU, then that also creates jobs. Starting from needing translators, and also for people to just have that drive to actually learn Swahili. The only fear would be that Europeans might be faster than Africans because the amount of Swahili courses outside of Africa supersedes the courses in Africa. So there's I think in Libya, in Nigeria, at University of Ile-Ife and University of Ibadan. Ghana has been teaching, University of Ghana. So yeah, it's actually a whole work of introducing Swahili also outside of Eastern and Southern Africa. So Eastern and Southern Africa has already implemented Swahili into either the curriculum or, so it's more about the long-term goal. It's not going to be something that will be resolved in the next, I don't know, I can't say next 10 years, but more of a long-term goal.
Okay, we really must stop and go on. Okay, but if we get time later, we can fit more questions in. Okay, our second speaker is Ruth Oji, who will be speaking online, and Ruth is from the Pan Atlantic University in Nigeria, and the paper is entitled Japa Migration Phenomenon, a critical discourse representation in literary texts. Hi, Ruth.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good to speak to you again.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, I'll quickly share my screen now. I made a little adjustment to my topic, and then I say Japa migration or migration phenomenon, a critical discourse representation in Adichie's Americana, because that's the text, that's the focus for my presentation. Over the years, migration has become a very much talked about phenomenon. It's kind of integral to human existence. We've had migrations across borders from Africa to Europe, Europe to Africa, but currently this trend of migrating to European countries is in strong motion. And in Nigeria here, there is this slang Japa, which has come to be very much in use. And a few talks with people shows that Japa simply means to flee, to run away because of the perceived problems that we have here in Nigeria. So what this study does is to explore from a critical discourse perspective what issues of ideology and power relations that may account for this mass exodus of people from Nigeria to several Western countries. Now, this Japa syndrome has enveloped many Nigerians because of their search for greener pastures. Several studies that have looked into the Japa syndrome, or just a few of them, shows that not just the young, but also the old are also embarking on this migration journey. And we've had statistics by media outlets revealing to us, for example, that in 2019, about 88,587 visa applications were received to several Schengen countries. The cable too, that's from Nigeria alone. The cable also showed that both Nigeria and Ghana had the most issued student visas in 2022. We also have business days noting that Nigerian nationals had the most significant visas to the UK, and that's where most people have been moving to. Now, this Nigerian situation is particularly noteworthy given the coinage of this term Japa, mostly because people feel that there are better opportunities out there. Now, as these statistics show, this quest to move out is on the rise, and that's why it's been studied. So, for example, I talked about Okwade and Awosusi 2023, who have tried to find out their focus being what is moving people to the UK. Then we have Duyili and Wachuku, very recent studies looking at the implications for Nigerians in Ukraine when the war broke out with Russia. And then particularly for this study, we're interested in the literary giant Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, whose novel Americana is renowned for the kinds of insights it shares specifically on the Nigerian situation. And there have been several studies that have looked at Americana from literary perspectives, from racial politics, linguistics, feminism, and so on. We also have migration studies or studies on this phenomenon from ethnographic perspectives, cultural irregularity in migration, responsibilities, and the drivers of migration. Well, from all of these, we can infer that this issue of migration has long been something that's been the focus of a lot of people, especially that of Africa to Europe. And this study agrees that the issue of migration, yes, scholars have dealt with it using Americana. However, the ideological basis for the more recent Japan moves being made by Nigerians haven't been examined using this text as a reference point, especially because it illustrates the Nigerian situation. And a curious thing to me is, why is it that this study or this novel by Adichie, as way back in 2012, 2013, I beg your pardon, is kind of replicating now this kind of move or mass exodus that's currently happening. So we are looking at this from the three-dimensional model of FECLOV, looking at the textual analysis, discourse practice, and social-cultural analysis so that we can appreciate meaning interpretation. Now, there are two major questions that I intend to answer here to find out what the ideological basis for the movements are, and to what extent power relations contribute to how they settle in their land of migration. So, like I've noted, I'm going to use CDA in order to unearth issues of ideologies and power relations as they relate to the Japa phenomenon. And just a bit about Chimamanda, almost everyone knows her. She was born in 1977 and has written so many novels, short stories, and non-fictions. Now, this text, Americana, is very well known, especially here in Nigeria and abroad, because it's won a lot of awards. Now, she talks about two teenagers who, while in school, fall in love. But then, Nigeria was undergoing the military rule, and so many people were fleeing at all costs. And because of that, Ifemelo, who is the major protagonist of the story, gets a partial scholarship, leaves for America, and then both of them couldn't go, although the plan was that Obinze was going to come later on. Now, Ifemelo is described as having several experiences that really affected her expectations and her turnout. She experienced racism, hardship, finds and loses relationships, and eventually returns to Nigeria. Obinze too tried at some point, but then he had to come back to Nigeria, and through some processes, he was able to make some money. Now let's talk about why FECLOV's three-dimensional model of CDA is important. FECLOV sees the three interconnected aspects of the communicative events. For him, the textual aspect, the discursive practice, and social practice all intertwine. He feels that there is a dialectic relationship between the three dimensions. He also feels that these kinds of interconnectedness can help to reveal whether discourse contributes to unequal power relations between social groups. And really, this is a view that has been advocated, and we believe that using the text will be able to unearth issues of ideologies and power relations. I'm using Americana as the study population for this study, and the rationale is that it really does have a robust engagement of migration issues from the Nigerian lens. It's set both in Nigeria and the US, and it describes the ideological stances of people who moved from Nigeria at a time, and it's profound because it gives insights into, why a similar thing is going on now. This concept of ideology and power relations is described with attention to how Adichie adopts her textual resources, relates them to the discourse practices, and blends the social cultural views of both societies. I selected excerpts, about 20 of them, and I've used 10 so far, and I'm looking to see if I would need to use more of them. The criterion for selecting them is that they manifest language that conveys ideological constructs and power relations. I also am using the qualitative research design. So this close reading enables me to pay particular attention to the textual constructions of ideologies and power relations. And I then subject those selected conversations to discourse analysis using linguistic tools that help to show ideologies. I also describe the implications of the noted ideologies and power relations for the Nigerian community. So I'll just delve into a bit of the data analysis, which one major theme that resonates is the deplorable learning conditions that prompts the Japa move. Adichie does a lot to paint the picture that led people to move all the way from Nigeria to different countries in the UK, the US. We look at from a textual perspective, linguistic features that suggest ideological underpinnings. For example, in chapter 8, she begins the chapter with the clause "strikes were common." So a first reading suggests the lack of agency. There is no active voice used there, so we do not at that point know who's responsible for the strikes. But as we read on, we find that we get to know the people responsible. Let's look at excerpt 1. She says, strikes were common now. In the newspapers, university lecturers listed their complaints, the agreements that were trampled in the dust by the government men whose own children were schooling abroad. Campuses were emptied, classrooms drained of life. Students hoped for short strikes because they could not have hoped to have no strike at all. Everyone was talking about leaving. So here, Adichie deploys the use of the simple past tense in describing the basis. You take a look for everyone talking about leaving Nigeria. First of all, she identifies the Nigerian government as being culpable in the menace since their children were schooling abroad. And by using such language choice, she kind of challenges the status quo of government officials who are really indifferent to the strike actions by university lecturers. Again, she uses the metaphor of trampling on something to depict the reckless abandon displayed by the same government officials of the agreements they usually make with those in the academic space. Now, this imagery of trampling in the dust signifies that there is a more powerful agent doing the trampling, with its attendance effect on the staff and students. Now, trampling in the dust also, as we know, portrays a power tussle between the government and the people, as shown by the students who know that they could not hope not to have a strike at all. So there is this painting of a gory image of students who are left at the mercy of dispassionate leaders who don't care. And she suggests that that's a major reason everyone was contemplating to leave. And from what she also mentioned there, I go back, she shows that the university lecturers did try to do something to salvage the situation. They listed their complaints, but nothing was going to be done about it. So the quest to live to a better place would then be concretized by a picture of a place where everything was considered normal. And that's why in SAP 2, we see Auntie Uju, who is Ifem's auntie, also asking her, the strike hasn't ended? And Ifemelu says, no, that last one ended. We went back to school and then they started another one. And she says, what kind of nonsense is this? Honestly, you should come and study here, and I'm sure you can easily get a scholarship. And in SAP 3, Obinze tells her to do it, go take the SATs and get a scholarship. So she went to the SATs. She went to the SATs at a Lagos center, packed with thousands of people, all bristling with their American ambitions. So here in SAP 2, Adichie tries to emphasize how long the strike actions in Nigerian universities happen. Her use of the first person plural pronoun, we are still on strike, we there, is used in an inclusive way to show that she and other youths have found themselves in a predicament that they don't know what to do. So there's this in-group solidarity. But then when they say they have, I get that again, they, sorry, just a moment. I want to pick exactly where that is. Okay. We went back to school and then they started another one. So the use of they there, the third person subject pronoun, shows a lack of solidarity with that outgroup, which represents the striking lecturers. So Adichie here is trying to represent the disappointment of Nigerians through the character Auntie Uju. And let's see. In the text, we also find that not only students, but also adults are forced out of Nigeria. And there are both actions and what have you that really make people, that convey underlying biases and power dynamics that propel them to leave. So for example, Auntie Uju happened to be related to a general, a major general, and by the time he died, his people came and mandated her to leave the apartment. Now there's something that her friend tells her, you have to leave immediately, make sure you clear the house, take everything, do it fast before these people come back, go to London or America. So what do we see there? Another basis upon which some Nigerians leave the country. So when certain things don't go well, they can go to any country they like. This kind of framing is utilized by Adichie to beam light on how the identity of certain individuals contribute to their quest to leave the country. So she here frames Uju's experiences within the context of how some ladies live off men who are not their husbands and how they have to japa or run away because of the ease of access to visas when their lives are threatened. And her using Uche as a frame by his use of the imperative sentence, go to London or America, shows the ease with which Uju could do so. And that also on its own, suggests a superiority stance, meaning that in Nigeria, you have people who can easily afford to just leave, and then you have the majority of people who would need to write a SAT exam to get the possibility of living. So this inequality between those who seek to japa is kind of normalized through Adichie's discursive practice and is presented to us here as common sense. We also look at issues of power relations very quickly, and several aspects of these power relations are constructed by Adichie through discourse to highlight how the migrants settle in their new homes. Now, using this 3-dimension to CDA, we also see how Adichie helps her readers to see how their perception of reality is constructed. So for one other theme we find there is that impersonation is a means to get settled down. She textually and discursively foregrounded the lived experiences of her characters and presented many of them as those who have to either settle for less or impersonate another individual to survive. And that's because survival in America is projected as being difficult. leading to Nigerians, especially for those she constructs as being societally well placed and having a base in America, except for those ones. For the other ones, they're just constructed as taking up odd jobs and being someone else because of not being qualified to work in America. So in excerpt 5 there, we see that Antuju arranges for Ifemelu to get another identity, and she convinced her that that's how many new migrants have to go about it. In 7, Obinze's friend, Ilova, also arranges for him to do the same, but he has to really pay a lot. And here we see the excerpt. So for example, Ifemelu queries why she has to be someone else, and Uju says, you can't work with your student visa, and work study is rubbish. It pays nothing, and you have to cover your rent and the balance of your tuition. Me, I'm working 3 jobs and it's not easy. I talked to my friend, I don't know if you remember Ngozi Okonkwo. She's now an American citizen and she's gone back to Nigeria for a while to start a business. I bet her and she agreed to let you work with her security card. So this was the case. And she also told her about how Amara, also Amara's cousin, was using Amara's ID to do the work. And in excerpt 7, when Obinze got Vincent to give him his identity, he said it's business, so you have to pay me. And he requested for about 40% of whatever was earned by Vincent. So
Ruth, we need to conclude. Summarize and conclude.
Okay. We also see the theme of fragility in terms of love relationships, and she used the theme of backgrounding to kind of de-emphasize the relationship that Ifemelu and Obinze had, but then projected more the other relationships that she had with the whites or African Americans there. We also see the role of racist ideologies in promoting unbalanced power relations. So ranging from how if an African woman leaves her natural hair, it's a problem, and how that makes her not to get job interviews, and how because you are black or she is black, she's categorized same as poor whites, regardless of whatever achievements that she makes. So we see all of those in the excerpts there. And here I conclude that Adichie tried to, by means of her words, vocabulary, grammar, as well as metaphorical usage, coined ideological constructs and dynamic power relations in her texts. And against this backdrop of the current menace of japa-ing in Nigerians, this study contends that Adichie had long foreseen this crisis and or foresaw the crisis and long wrote about it. Also, anchoring aspects of the 3-dimensional model of CD as tools that can help us decipher issues of ideology and power relations, we say that Adichie's deliberate and conscious use of these concepts provides a critique of societal construct, and what she tries to do is to encourage readers not to just normalize all of these things that are put out there, but to make people question existing power structures. It's also a call for the government to reconsider its doings. What is it that's propelling brain drain, motivating a lot of people to leave Nigeria? The call also extends to highly developed world countries to which Nigerians and other Africans are jackpying to consider ways of eradicating racism. This study does agree with Jordan Singh, 2002, that CDA does provoke critical research and that social justice, as a way of exposing social wrongs with the mindset of promoting processes that can help to finally bring them to a stop, possibly, or find a way to right some of these wrongs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We have time for one question. Okay.
Hi, hello Ma. Hello everyone. So, Uzoma Okora, and we work in the same university. Dr. Ruth is actually the head of our department. So the first word is basically a comment. So when you mention Jakpa being rampant now, I personally think that the Jakpa syndrome has always been in existence, I mean, but like you rightly said, at some point and every time there are people who can easily go, and there are people who don't have maybe the material wealth or opportunity to just leave. But then why it's looking, because I just want to have that impression out there, that why it's looking like it's more rampant now is because more of those people who couldn't easily go have discovered maybe some kind of hack or some way to leave, but it has always been in existence, and that's why it's like 2012 is happening now in 2023. Yeah. Then the second aspect is just maybe something you like to consider, because I noticed that most of your the excerpts you took from the pre-migration period of Ifemelu and the migration, the time when she was there. And it would be nice if you look into the post-migration, by the time she came back to Nigeria, and you could see that there's a lot of power structure there, because then she realizes the power she has as having some form of foreign background, yes, like a Bintu, or how do we put it? I've just been back. There's a way we put it in Nigeria when you're trying to say, oh, I've just arrived, okay? And she has more access to opportunities. But then also the power relation with Obinze, Obinze, who never actually traveled to America and always wanted to travel to America, but then was able to gain wealth and have even more opportunity to travel, so such that it reduces his confidence, not his confidence, his respect of America, seeing that it's just somewhere he can go to and fro. And Ifemelu has more opportunities. I just feel if you look at that that period of her coming back to Nigeria and having these opportunities, it could really help with the work to see the diversity in it, because she basically admits that it's paid off being in America, even though it was difficult. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Ruth, would you like to comment? Or would you like to?
Thank you
or is
so
that
much.
just
Yes. Yes.
stuck, are we? Internet.
Is that?
Hello,
Okay, so I'm just limiting.
we didn't catch any of that because it was. Can you repeat that, because everything got frozen. Everything's still frozen.
20 excerpts that I'm working on already. So I'm going to include the post-migration aspect, because it's really critical to still show what happens. And for me, again, it's also the thing of what happens after the jackbuying. Now we have an expression called jackbada. So people who go are also coming back. And we also see include that part. So I want to thank you, Uzoma, for mentioning that.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the last talk. I apologize for the freezing up there of internet. Okay, so we're moving to our last talk. It's W.S. Gabinde from the University of Zululand in South Africa. And the title is On Readiness of Indigenous Languages to be Used as Media of Instruction in South African Schools, Real or Mere Language Ideology.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm greeting you, all who are present here and those who are listening to us from the online. My topic, as you, oh yes, I don't have it. I don't have my preparations on slides, but I've requested my brother there to help me just keep on showing my notes to you. The topic is on the same topic that has been discussed so much in this conference. The language and the power of language, which language to be used when. I'm looking at the context in the country, South Africa, my country. It has been said that indigenous languages are not intellectualized enough to be used as media of instruction in our schools. So in this topic of this presentation, I'm not questioning that. I'm checking, yes, this is exactly what I'm checking. I'm checking whether how true this statement is, that they are not ready, they are not capable of used as a media of instruction in schools. I opened my presentation with this quote from Ademo 2016, where he says, ideology has a structure which can be mapped and understood by paying attention to the way the choice or choices are made in language. He makes this statement when he is interrogating apartheid, one of the most gruesome systems that have been applied in South Africa, one of the most oppressive systems that have been applied sometime in South Africa. So, in looking at this matter, this issue, I start by giving you a short background, the background which has been also given to you by some presenters before me. In South Africa, we have got a period, very important period in our history, the period before 1994. That period is formed by colonialism. There's a colonial period there, and thereafter the apartheid period. These periods existed respectively before 1994. And during that period, they established themselves respectively so in regard to English and Africans. And so when the political independence is attained by the country in 1994, some changes are made by the democratically inaugurated government. This government introduces 9 indigenous languages into the space. And now we have got 11 official languages. And with this proclamation, a huge expectation is evoked that the parity of esteem is going to be applied to all these languages. But unfortunately, that is not the case. That has never been the case. The status quo that was before 1994 continues as if nothing has happened. But in principle, in the Constitution, these 9 languages are treated as equal. In writing, black and white, that is the case. So, there is no question about the effectiveness and efficiency of primary language in education. There is enough evidence that says the primary language is the most suitable for the possibly highest development of the cognitive mind of a learner. I can quote several writers. Kamonga Malu is one of them. The PENSAP board in South Africa has always said that, and also UNESCO has long declared that, said that. English is dominantly, as it has been before, it had been even before 1994, is still very much dominant. It's the language that is used as the medium of instruction in more than 80% of the public schools in South Africa. And this is not to the advantage of the nation, I would say. The performance, it is used as the medium of the instruction, and a vast percentage of the citizens are not competent in the language. This is verified now and again, even by the minister who has been the minister of the basic national education for years. In one of her reports in 2010, says the language of learning and teaching, LOLT, which is a second language for black pupils, is viewed as a major factor behind poor matric results of black learners in South Africa. And this is stated by one of the leaders in the government. Then you ask yourself, who has to effect the change? Because it's obvious the change has to be effected. So I'm looking at this, because this is a critical analysis of a literature. This presentation comes from this critical is a critical analysis of literature. So I looked at a number of people who are arguing for the change of the medium of instruction in South Africa. So there are many. Atemo here, 2016, and PRA, 2017, says it is now common knowledge that the education is best conducted and most effective when undertaken in the mother tongue. I've said that UNESCO has also confirmed that. And one other writer, McKinney, 2017, it's not only lamenting on the rejection of the indigenous languages from the education realm, but she laments, and her laments is underscored by the fact that when you reject the language, the indigenous language of the people, you are somehow automatically depriving the learners who are incompetent in the language of education. And this underscores the importance of education. And as she says, that it's very much strange that the most treasured resource a child brings to formal schooling, which is language, is deemed a problem. This is an indigenous language of a learner going to school, a young kid who has been communicating in her primary language. As soon as they enter the gates of the school, this language of yours is a problem here. That is what McKinney is questioning. This study, this analysis is also very much based on Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, who advocates that true teaching happens when a learner participates in the activities of teaching and learning process. And you can tell now, with that as your premise, you can imagine how difficult it is, how difficult the situation is for South African learners in schools who are not competent in English. Because education, the most important, powerful instrument to advance people's lives today, is glossed in the strange language. I would say strange, being very much aware that English has been with us for ages. But with us, that does not mean me as an individual. It means, it refers to my forebears who have been there. But, and also, when you look at an individual, each and every individual learner, you have to question yourself whether this learner is competent in the language. And most learners this time in South Africa have difficult challenges with the English language. So, ladies and gentlemen, now I have to look at the views of the people who are saying indigenous languages are not ready. These are scholars. These are people who have done research. So we have to consider their views and the points, factors they put on the table. My question is really true that South African indigenous languages are not ready? So let us hear what some of them do say. One thing they mention is the underdevelopment of the indigenous languages. One factor that has been always mentioned here. South African indigenous languages are said to be underdeveloped and subsequently non-standardized. They are underdeveloped, so they are non-standardized. I wish to say, as the author of this paper, that non-standardization implies, among other things, that the language concerned lacks orthography and corpus in terms of literature. And in South Africa, out of the 11 languages I mentioned, isiZulu and isiXhosa are the most spoken languages. I will compare them with English, although I don't have anything against English. But if it is used by someone as a pretext for ulterior reasons, we will look at it and we will question it. Not necessarily because we are against the language. A language should be just a language. isiZulu is spoken by 24% of the citizens of South Africa. isiXhosa, 16%. English, less than 10. It was 9 plus with the 2016, 2011 census, but recently think it's 10, but it's not more than 10. Right. So we are looking at the non-development of languages. Of course, I am focusing on these two, and I choose to single out more, even more, isiZulu. Yes. The one, not because it's my primary language, because of facts that I'm putting before you, ladies and gentlemen. isiZulu has a vast corpus which speaks to its linguistics and aesthetic literary works. isiZulu has got its own series of dictionaries. We're talking here of a language that is supposedly non-standardized. It has got its own series of dictionaries, monolingual and bilingual. It has got abundance of literature on linguistic subdisciplines like morphology, pragmatics, semantics, syntax, phonetics, etc. And it also boasts of its massive aesthetic works such as poetry, ubunkondlo, izinkondlo, prose, indaba ezinde nemfishane, lullaby or cradle songs, imlolozelo, riddles, iziphicaphicwane, etc. All these subdisciplines and literary works have been taught and assessed in a formal school environment even before the attainment of political independence in South Africa. This language has been taught as a language, and it has got its literature. It's written down. The question is, can it be used as a medium of instruction? As a testimony for the well-structuredness of isiZulu orthography, the offering of the language is no longer confined to the South African borders and to the South African native speakers, but it has extended to even other continents. Yes, the language has for years been kept alive for, among other things, by national newspapers issued daily and weekly respectively. Yes, and the radio station, Umkhosi FM, right, broadcasting in Zulu is the biggest one in the country and the second in the continent of South Africa. Then, now, looking at it, as I'm wrapping up, looking at the other factor that is mentioned here as the factors against is non-technologibility or non-intellectualization of indigenous languages. Technology, who's this writer here? I will just focus on the writer here. Where the two differ they differ according to Webb, they differ from the weights, technology and stuff. Technological weights. But Jumbo 2020 argues that the word technology, the concept technology has been framed Eurocentrically. And in that sense, it has excluded the knowledges of Africa. And by so doing, you exclude the cultures of Africa, you are automatically sidelining the language or languages of those cultures to which these languages are constitutive. So all what he says, the concept itself needs to be reconceptualized. Then you will see that, in fact, it is in a hand-in-glove relationship with the African languages. Right. And so, good people, another thing that it's mentioned is that languages, the people speaking different indigenous languages in South Africa have not agreed on one language that can be utilized as a medium of instruction. And I say that deal is not necessary. And lastly, before I conclude, the other reason that has stifled the progress of promoting South African indigenous languages is the apartheid legacy. during the apartheid system period, all African languages, indigenous languages, are looked at, down upon, they are inferior, they are not the languages that can advance one's life. So it's only English, in particular, and Afrikaans. So even today, many people in the country are still having that negative attitude towards the languages. They are still having that perception, those negative perceptions against the language, the African languages. And so that is not, so that when you look at that, you can tell that now, in other words, the denial of African languages to be part of the education system is not based on facts there, it's just perceptions. People are asking themselves if they pursue indigenous languages, where will these things take them to? Because they look and they still believe that English is the language of green pastures. It's a golden language. So those are the things. So in wrapping up, ladies and gentlemen, I, because of time, have just stated a few things here that I say pose danger to African indigenous languages if no changes are effected. One of them is that we'll soon see the extinction, total extinction of African languages. Yes, and many other factors like national projects of Africa, like African Renaissance, decolonization of the curriculum, those are also going to be stifled by the negligence, sidelining of African languages, right? But lastly, I made some, because I put a question in the beginning, is this really true or what? Or is a game? So the main thing that I came to that became discernible to me was the generalization of the status, on the status or statuses of indigenous languages regarding their underdevelopment or development. There are too many to be put in one blanket because they are developing at different levels, at different stages. So, as I've given you an example of one or two, some are very ready and are more ready than others. So don't use that generalization to block the development of all African indigenous languages, so to say. So I will now just conclude, but I choose to conclude by this quote from Madadze, 2019. He says, when referring to what people used to say, that the general statement that, okay, these indigenous languages cannot be used as media of instruction because they are underdeveloped, etc. So the comment of Madadze is, it has become fashionable to argue that African languages lack the requisite terminology to offer science and mathematics. This seems to be delaying, pretext, or tactic. If such an argument were to be entertained, then African languages will never be developed to such an extent that they would be deemed adequate to offer the said subjects. I thank you.
Again, we have time for one question, no comment. Or maybe two. Okay. His turn.
Thank you very much for your presentation, which I've liked. I think it will be a comment, not a question.
Thank you.
You know, you have told us about people who argue against the use of indigenous languages. When UNESCO talks about using mother languages or the languages of the catchment area, which is the term that because there's some areas where people are mixed, when they talk about using these languages, especially in the first 4 years of primary education, they're actually informed by highly scientific studies. And to strengthen your paper, you could mention the actual reasons why it is very important to use these languages. Number one, see the mental energy as some kind of currency that you use to buy something. If you buy one product, it will be much easier for you to use this currency to buy one product than to divide it into two. Let me put it in a different way. When you respect the mental energy, you divide this energy into learning the concept, what is being taught. And then at the same time, you are using the same mental energy to learn the grammar of a new language. English, for instance, is a gender language. Izuzuru as noun classes. Yes. So what, the disadvantage is that you are dividing the attention between what is being taught and something else, which means then your concentration is less for those concepts. Yes. Number two, a kid feels dislocated, which means they don't have even the confidence to ask questions and make comments in the class. Now, people talk a lot about IQ. One thing that we forget is that confidence is what takes us to many places. Many people that you see in politics, becoming presidents, ministers, etc., they are not any less, they are not any more intelligent than you. What they might have more than you and I is actually confidence. So when you teach using mother tongues, the kid has more confidence and therefore can participate fully rather than being passive in class. So those are some of the comments that one can use. Now, South African Constitution, of course, left out 3 languages. I mean, they mentioned 11, but they left out Khoi and San and Nama. That's your area. Then you might want to find out how this happened and how it can be mitigated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Yes, indeed, in my presentation, although I did not mention it, it's written that in schools generally back home, learners are reserved, too reserved in class, and not because they want to, not because they choose. They have been mummed by the policies of the country. And definitely, at a later stage, you want them to express themselves, to participate in discussions of national importance. They cannot. They cannot, because you have put this language. Yes, the language is a problem to them. That's the thing. So, as Vygotsky, I referred to, spoke about the importance of participation in class. Those processes cannot happen in class if you are not confident. If you cannot express yourself, when you are going to express yourself, you have to be confident. Then you will express your mind. Thank you, Prof.
I think we'll allow one more question.
Okay, so first is to thank you for the presentation. And so my question is just out of curiosity. So one, we'll be finding that most of the indigenous languages face a lot of challenges, and this is mostly advocated by the various institutions. And just as you mentioned in South Africa, where there are several languages, then when you get into like an institution that is maybe the pupils, then you'll be told your indigenous language is now not more of required here. Then in this case, this could be, of course, a disadvantage to the multilingualism discourses. But my question is, don't you think to an extent they are right, or rather your perspective on the same? Because at last you'll be finding that mostly the setting and everything is done in the foreign languages, in what they frame to be the formal languages. Then lastly, my question just on the same is, don't you think that how does these indigenous languages enhance the education system if they are more of like not used in the setting system? Thank you.
Thank you, sir, Prof. Don't know what I got the first one, But on this second one, how these languages can enhance the education. You see, one researcher says one way of developing a language, it's by using it. So in this case, you keep on saying the languages are underdeveloped. You are waiting for a particular stage, a particular period, which I don't think is feasible in our life, where we will say now they are ready, they are fully developed, so for us to use them. That is a problem. Here we need brave leadership that will simply say now, it's the policy, we implement this language. Just imagine 24, 25% neglected of the percentage of this citizenship, speaking the language, put aside at the expense of, or rather, for the language that is spoken by so few people. So here, this is a game. This is a colonial game. So now we are playing in the hands of some invisible behind. This game will be played, that language will be used until we die, until these languages disappear. We keep on saying the languages are not developed, they are underdeveloped. And as if there's someone who's doing major, as if we know someone will tell us, you have to have this amount of development, then now the language will be used. You see, that thing will not happen. You see, when you are looking at the tar road, you see the shining part somewhere there at the distance. You see that, and you keep on saying, I will reach that thing, I will reach that part, the shining part. It's not, you will never reach that part. So that's the thing. Thank you.
Is it a comment or question?
Is there a possibility to publish in an academic journal in Swahili and other indigenous languages? That will be a good opportunity to construct and some preparations for that journal for maybe in this academic conference.
We have journals and proceedings and publications.
Swahili?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
We have. Talk to me and I can give you all. Actually, we will give everybody much information over the next week. So, but yes, excellent point. We have many publications and efforts that we're making to ensure that everything is visible. Okay, great comment. Okay, you guys, so we're going to lunch now, and we'll probably cut the lunch short because we need to, once again, catch up on time, but the lunchroom is waiting.